we have Deanna Minich. She is a certified functional medicine practitioner. She's a nutrition scientist. She's an international lecturer, educator, and author with over 20 years of experience in academia and in the food and dietary supplement industry. Currently, Dr. Minich is serving as the Chief Science Officer at the Symphony of Natural Health. She has been active as functional medicine clinician in clinical trials and in her own practice called Food and Spirit. She is the author of 6 consumer books on the wellness topic. Get out there and Google her right now. 4 book chapters and over 50 scientific publications. Her academic background is in nutrition science, including a Master of Science in Human Nutrition and Dietetics, a doctorate in medical science from the University of Groningen, I hope I said that right, in the Netherlands. She has served on the Nutrition Advisory Board for the Institute of Functional Medicine. I'm a big fan of the Institute of Functional Medicine, and actually on the side, I'm a nutrition coach, a functional nutrition coach. She also is on the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and the Institute of Brain Potential. This is where I first saw Dr. Minich. I took a course for nursing CEUs through the Institute of Brain Potential, and I believe it was Healthy Aging or in Nutrition. I can't remember the title, but she blew my mind, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get her for a conference. So I said, I'm bringing her to MESSA, and I'm bringing her for my members who are creating Worksite wellness conferences and who want to start on their own personal journey. Here she is, Dr. Deanna Minich, and you have share privileges.
Wonderful. Wow. Thank you so much, Rhonda. It's a delight to be here with all of you this morning. I'm bringing up my slides right now. I just want to say I was getting a little bit of a glimpse into the previous session. I want to be like Bianca. Wow. In fact, so inspiring to see everybody moving and, moving the body. And what I'm going to talk about in this next hour is moving the mind. And how do we move the mind better, especially now when so many people have so much more, I would say, anxiety, depression, mental health disorders and imbalances are at an all-time peak. So what I'd like to do with you this morning, moving into the afternoon, is to have a conversation about what you can do about your mood and to create some food solutions so that every day you can be making decisions to help you to have a better mood. And then at the end, we'll take questions. I have a lot of different tools in here for you. So some of these tools can also be brought into the family setting. You can do these things with your family. You can do them with your friends, your church communities. So I like to make this information very practical. And as Rhonda said, my background is in functional medicine. And I've worked in the natural product industry for some time. So I have a sense of nutrition, supplements, lifestyle medicine, and bringing all of that together. But at heart, I am a nerdy scientist. So I do want to at least unpack a little bit for you about the science. Like if you can understand why something is happening in your body, you can better understand how to solve it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the science for why we would have a mood disorder or why we might be imbalanced. And then I'm going to talk about some eating strategies because, as I like to say, colorful foods make for colorful moods. So if you can remember that as we start talking about the eating strategies, we'll have some fun with it. And then I do want to talk at the end about some of the tools that I have used with my online groups and even through my clinical practice to help people with that food mood connection. So let's first talk about root causes. How do people have changes in their mood? What is the root cause? I think that root causes are so important. It's almost like we have to be the detective for our own health state. Right? So we have to be asking ourselves all these questions. Why? Go deeper and deeper because we don't want to just patch things. We want to understand them so we can actually get at the cause to solve it completely. So let's just talk about these 3 things that I have listed here: inflammation, the gut, and nutrient imbalances. So the first one is all about inflammation. Right? I'm sure that you've heard a lot about inflammation over the years. You know, what is inflammation? It's redness, pain, heat, swelling. This is where we see an imbalance of the inflammatory response of the body, which then leads to an immune response. So in the case of looking at mental health, what we tend to see is that there is what has been referred to as brain on fire. It's almost like the brain, much like another organ in the body, can be inflamed. And one of the things that sets the match alight is having high blood sugar. And through getting that high blood sugar, what leads to that? Well, many times it's because of a stress response, or many times it's because of what we're eating. And in fact, when we eat, we could be creating inflammation in the body because we might have food allergies, food intolerances. Maybe we had like this super smoothie, sweet shake, and we had nothing else, and we just poured that into the body, and then that led to inflammation. So the other thing that can happen too is when we are inflamed in our bodies, this can change how we respond and what our behavior is like. So there's some studies to suggest that we're more impulsive and more reactive when we are inflamed. And being inflamed can actually change our emotional state. We could have more anger, frustration, and even more fatigue, anxiety, and depression just because we're physically inflamed. So I want you to think about that for a second. Think about where you might have inflammation in your bodies, whether it's the mouth, the joints. Do you have back pain when you wake up in the morning? All of these subtle aspects of inflammation can build up over time and start to change our mind. So this is just to kind of show you what I just described. If we start up in the brain, where we might have an emotional response to something, to some kind of stressor. So stress can lead to inflammation, and this is how that occurs. So up in the brain, we have an emotional response. That sets the brain in motion to signal the rest of the body that there needs to be a response. So the adrenals, the adrenal glands, which I'm sure you've heard about, get engaged. They start to produce stress hormones. Those stress hormones are good because they help us to survive. But if we're constantly producing them over and over again, we get kind of exhausted, right? Our immune system stops working so well. Our brain starts to get a little bit more foggy, if you will, because we have exhausted that stress response over and over again. So I want you to think about your behavior in the everyday of life. Do you feel like you can be more present, that you can be thinking about your choices when you go to the grocery store? I think that one of the issues with mental health, and by the way, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, right? So it's good that we are shining a light on this. Thank you, Rhonda, for having this spotlight into mental health, because so much of our quality of life is determined by our quality of mind. And our quality of mind is so much determined by our quality of body. And so as I was speaking to, if we have inflammation in the body, many times this can impact our behavior. So we're unable to really think and be thoughtful. We're unable to delay gratification. We want things now. We are impulsive. We are reactive. So think about that in terms of your behavior. You might be thinking, well, I'm not really sure if I have inflammation, but I know that I am pretty impulsive. You know, think of this rise of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. What is the root cause? Is there some element of inflammation? So now when we do have stress, as I'm talking about stress, you know, we can't avoid stress. It's just in our everyday. So what we need to do when we are stressed, and I, I reflect on this for myself every day, how can we help ourselves to feel more cared for when we are stressed? Because typically when we're stressed, we're just doing everything fast. We're just trying to get things done. We are reacting. And many times we start to see the effects of that with food. So stress can get in the way of eating healthy. So when we're stressed, many times we're reaching for comfort foods, right? So we're reaching for things like pretzels, potato chips, ice cream, donuts, bread, pastas, the refined carbohydrates, lots of sugar, lots of salt, lots of fat. Because in some ways, these foods are changing our neurochemistry. They're giving us kind of a short-term quick fix, but longer term, this just creates more inflammation and more stress. So the goal is to break the cycle. How do we break the cycle? So for some of you, when you get very stressed, you want to eat more. You just feel like you're eating nonstop. You're always hungry. You're never satiated. So if we look at those kinds of high stress times, and by the way, there are some of you where you get stressed and you stop eating. And that would denote that probably you've been stressed for some time, right? Whereas if you get that sense of hunger, that's kind of a normal response for cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol is trying to get your body to bring in more food so that you can deal with the stress. So in the cases of where we go from a little bit of stress, moderate stress, and then into high stress, what tends to happen typically, and in response to that cortisol, is we start to have a greater desire for food. You see how that pink bar is higher than it is under moderate stress? So in theory, we start to crave more. So even though we might be craving more, we may not always be eating more, but in theory, our body wants food. And what kind of food does our body go for? As I was talking about before, many times it's not broccoli, spinach, it's not bananas, oranges, it's not fruits and vegetables. What we tend to see is that people tend to go towards less main meals. You see these bars right here. They tend to go into potentially changes in snacking. And the biggest thing, you see the star up here, the biggest thing is that they stop eating fruits and vegetables. They stop eating fruits and vegetables. They start eating more bread, potatoes, rice, pasta, and they start eating more sweets, more salty foods. And you know why? There's actually a physical reason for this. When we exhaust our stress response, we are changing up our salt level in the body. We're changing hydration. So we tend to get dehydrated. We tend to crave salt to bring our bodies back into balance. So what is emotional eating? I'm kind of speaking to that a bit here because I'm talking about how we respond to stress. 75% or even more of eating is due to emotional reasons. So it's really, really important to be looking at our mood state, to be looking at our emotions. Emotions are quick. We can feel angry for a certain amount of time, but then when that stays over the long term, that becomes a mood state. Now it's like we have this cloud rather than, I kind of think of emotions like raindrops. And the mood is the cloud. It is perhaps it's casting a cloudiness on our lives, right? So with emotional eating, when we are eating instead of feeling our emotions, what can tend to happen, and I've done this with people over so many years, seeing the connection between emotions and food, is I tend to see that they go towards foods that are very satisfying from a taste perspective, but not very redeeming from a body perspective. They don't give you a lot back. So again, a lot of sweet and salty foods. And in fact, many people don't know this, but your emotional state can affect your taste buds and how you taste. So this was a study in which they had people attending a hockey game. They had them envision and see these 4 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie. And they track their emotional state with their ability to taste the foods that they presented them with. And what they found was that when people felt positive because there was a win, that was associated with more sweet taste and less sour taste intensity. In other words, when you are feeling good, when you have positive emotions, so to speak, that tends to be associated with tasting things more sweetly. So you don't need as much to come in and override any kind of sour taste. Whereas negative emotions, if you're sad that the game was that you experienced a loss of the team that you wanted to win, at least in this particular research study, what we see is that negative emotions were associated with more sour and less sweet taste. So think about that for yourself. When things are going really well in your life, you may not feel the need to eat as much because you're actually fully tasting and your body's receiving that signal. Whereas when things feel a little bit awry, when your life feels sour, it's almost like you taste more sour, right? If you can remember that. So physically, your body is responding to emotions through tasting. Now, is there a difference between, oops, is there a difference between mental stress or physical stress? So physical stress could be going to the gym, exerting a lot of activity in the body. Mental stress could be like taking a test. Could there be a difference? There is a difference. So when we are mentally stressed, let's say, maybe we're not taking a test, but every day we're taxed in our mind. We got to think through things. We're worried. We have to think at work to a large degree, and we're under stress. What can happen with mental stress is that different tastes are actually shortened. So the flavor is less, the taste is less. We don't get as much enjoyment from food. With physical stress, like if we're just exercising, we can actually improve certain things like sourness is shortened. So we don't experience so much sour taste from eating a sour food. So the only reason I mention this to you is because we have all different kinds of stresses in our lives, and some of them are really good for us. We need a little bit of healthy stress. Otherwise, we wouldn't wake up in the morning and go to work and do the things that we want to do. So a little bit of physical stress, like Bianca was showing us, right? Whether we're engaged in physical stress, we're working our bodies, as long as we're not overexerting, a little bit of that can actually be beneficial for how we taste. But when it comes to mental stress, we can be shortening our tastes. So how do we help ourselves to eat a less inflammatory diet? What could we do to reduce inflammation so that the body is more, I would say, in balance on the inside, so that we're living life on the outside also in balance? These are a couple of the features, and I'm going to come back to some of these. Some of us are just cooking and frying and broiling and grilling. We're just overcooking our foods, and we're taking the life force out of the food, meaning that we're taking the nutrients out when we're overcooking. And not only are we taking out the nutrients, but we're introducing inflammatory compounds to the food. So just the other day, I was having breakfast with some colleagues. We were at a hotel, and I was looking at, the breakfast choices. Bacon, as an example, is one of those foods where it can be very inflammatory because it's highly fried, it's browned, it's crisp. And I know that many of those foods taste quite good, like a pizza crust or a cookie, or when you take bread and you toast it and you make it more brown. But in actuality, when you turn that food brown, it's almost like you're adding fire to the food in the way of exhausting it of anything beneficial, or at least reducing it of things that can be beneficial. So I just want you to think about that, because sometimes people won't change what they're eating, but they can change their cooking. The second one is too much sugar. Sugar, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but sugar lights the match of inflammation. So think about, and we can talk about what are some healthy sources of sugars, because, we can't think that we're just going to stop having anything sweet. That's impossible. There are healthy forms of sweeteners and sugars, so we can talk about that spectrum. Less good quality fats. So trans fats, some of you know about trans fats. They're on the nutrition facts label. Trans fats are just outright inflammatory. So we need to be sure that we have good quality fats. We want the rainbow, which I'm going to talk about in terms of eating the whole foods rainbow of food. We want to explore with a healthcare practitioner whether or not we might have allergies. Some of us are allergic to eggs, and we're eating those eggs every morning for breakfast, not realizing that we may actually have some kind of low allergy response that is making our body more stressed, more inflamed. Maybe we can't lose weight. It is just, we feel fatigued. It can be leading to all kinds of issues, but we don't even realize the impact of those foods that we're having every day. So the second root cause, which is a little bit more complex, many of you have heard a lot about the gut and the gut microbiome. The health of your body in so many ways is determined by the health of your gut. If you have a healthy gut, you're going to prevent certain things from leaking into the body and causing the body to get inflamed. I'm sure that you've heard of the phrase leaky gut. So leaky gut is where you start to have almost like these pinholes in the gut lining. The gut becomes more porous. It becomes more permeable. It starts letting things in. And how does that even happen? It can happen because of stress. It can happen because we're eating food that is filled with toxins or sugar or inflammatory compounds. And as a result of that leaky gut, eventually what can happen is that the brain becomes leaky. The brain starts letting things in. So we want to ensure that we have a healthy gut so that we keep our brain protected from inflammation. So dysbiosis, what is dysbiosis? It is where you have an unhealthy gut microbiome. And a practitioner can help to assess whether or not you have unhealthy gut microorganisms and whether or not your gut is imbalanced. There are certain laboratory tests that you can do in order to see if you have a good, healthy, functioning gut. There are even lab tests that you can do to see whether or not you have a leaky gut. I think most people just have leaky gut and they don't realize it. The other aspect is LPS. What is LPS? Now, this is a fancy term. This is a toxin. It's lipopolysaccharide. It's a toxin that is produced by the bacteria in your gut when you're eating lots of high-fat foods without any plants or fiber. So this is when people begin to feel very flu-like and sick and fatigued after they eat a meal. It's almost like they feel more tired after eating rather than get more energy. So when that happens, I would say that many times that's because of a reaction to the food. It can also be connected in some way because there is leaky gut or an unhealthy gut microbiome. You know, the other thing is that I think many people are in food ruts. They're eating the same thing every day. Think about that for yourself. Do you have the same oatmeal every day? I have worked with so many clients where they think it's a good thing. They say, Deanna, I just have, X, Y, and Z. I have bread, cheese, coffee. I have an egg for breakfast and I'm all set. And I say, well, even if we're eating healthy foods for breakfast or for lunch or for dinner or we're snacking and it's healthy, we still want diversity. We need to rotate our foods. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Diversity is key for the gut. When you eat different foods, it's almost like you're giving your gut microbiome different foods to create different microorganisms. And your gut works better when you have more diverse microorganisms. It's kind of like, you just don't want one set of bugs. You want a whole array of different bugs to kind of come in. And it's, I think of the gut like the soil of our body. If we think of a garden, the gut is like the soil. So just like soil needs healthy microorganisms, it needs to be turned over with different crops. Same kind of thing in the gut. And people are in food ruts, they're in life ruts. And then they start to have mental health issues. And that can be connected into a less robust microbiome in the gut. And then I'm going to talk about fiber. Oh my goodness, so many of us need so much more fiber. We're just not getting enough fiber. The fiber lays the healthy soil in the gut, so to speak. When we bring in fiber, it's almost like giving our gut fertilizer to grow these good, healthy gut microorganisms. We get these short chain fatty acids. These short chain fatty acids like butyrate actually helps to produce factors like BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, that help with the brain. It's a growth factor for the brain, and you can do that even through the gut. So there are so many different pathways to depression, just even through the gut. We can have a stress response. Some of you feel stress in your gut. You start to feel the butterflies in your stomach. Your bowel patterns change when you have a bout of stress. We actually produce neurotransmitters in the gut. We produce serotonin. We produce more serotonin, more melatonin. We produce a number of neurotransmitters in the gut in higher proportions than we actually produce in the brain. So much of our mental stimuli is started in the gut. Inflammation can overactivate the gut, leading to a lot of different inflammatory compounds that can then circulate in the blood and then go into the brain and start to activate or excite certain of the nerve cells. And then in this last one here, our everyday eating can amp up things like insulin, glucose, these two things, high insulin, high glucose. And we all know these things because we get them measured when we go into our doctor to look at our fasting blood sugar. Sometimes we look at fasting insulin. Well, when these things start to go awry, that can start to signal that there is inflammation. Insulin and glucose can be connected into depression, right? And into our mood state. So be thinking about stress and how that impacts our gut. Just even a quick acute bout of stress can have a significant effect. So be taking care of yourself, be taking care of your mood and also your gut during these times of stress. Stress kind of has this ripple effect, right? We tend to feel kind of that sense of queasiness or that nervousness feeling in our gut. Sometimes, as I was mentioning, like butterflies in the stomach. This is our vagus nerve. Our gut is heavily innervated. In fact, 90% of our nerve network is really in our torso. It's in our gut area. And then we communicate what we feel back up to the brain. So if we can change the gut, we can change the signal back up to the brain. So when we take care of our stress, when we take care of our gut, then we start to change our immune system. Have you ever noticed that when people are overly stressed, they get sick a lot? They start to have immune health challenges. They start to have more inflammation. They start having more gut issues. They can't eat the same foods that they have for so long. So all of these things are then shifting and changing the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome is also then changing all of those things, the immune system, inflammation, gut health. So be thinking that, everything is all connected. Nothing that you're doing is insignificant. It all counts. So in working with a practitioner, one of the things that you might come across are what I call the 3 pillars of gut health. And when we look at from left to right, we see the fibers, which I'll talk more about, right? It's really important to have a lot of different kinds of fibers. Then probiotics. Probiotics are the actual living organisms that we find in foods. Things like yogurt, fermented foods like sauerkraut, or tempeh, miso, kimchi, pickles. Even pickles can give you probiotics. And then we see that there is another class of compounds that's really important for the gut called polyphenols. This is where a lot of the color comes in that I'm going to talk about. So I do think it's really important if we're going to take care of our gut to have the fiber, good healthy gut bugs, if you will, and the polyphenols, the actual plant compounds that those gut bugs are going to chew up and give us to help with the metabolism of the gut. So what we see, back to fiber for a second, we really need a different take on fiber. With more fiber, we see less depression. So as you can see here with 1, 2, 3 at the bottom, the more fiber we take in, the lower the odds for depressive symptoms. And we see an even greater effect for fruit and veggie fiber versus cereal fiber. But you do see an effect of both fibers. There are different kinds of fibers that are doing different things. So that's why I think making sure that we change them up. So what happens is, sorry, I'm not sure why my slide is advancing here, but so with the fiber, what tends to happen is that it gets broken down into short chain fatty acids. You might have heard about one of them by the name of butyrate. Butyrate is very popular right now. Butter contains butyrate. We tend to find it in small amounts in the diet, but typically we can get it from fiber, from actually fermenting the fiber in the gut through our gut microorganisms. And we need that butyrate because it's helping to give us a healthy mucin layer in the gut. It's giving us a protective layer. It's producing certain proteins that help to keep our gut less leaky and also protected in the way of the immune system. The butyrate is also an energy source for the colon cells. And believe it or not, fiber can help to reduce the production of cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and help to enhance the production of the growth factor that I mentioned for the brain, which is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. There are some of these specialty probiotics that are coming out now, which are certain microorganisms that may produce neurotransmitters in the gut to affect mood state. Now, I would say that if you went to your doctor to ask, oh, can I have the latest psychobiotic? This is not really at the level of clinical care. This is more in the research. But what we know is that it takes about 30 to 50 years to translate research into the clinic. So I would say to be looking at the horizon of what is to come for our mood state. If we change the probiotics that we're taking in, can we influence depression and anxiety? And some of the earlier research that we're seeing right now would suggest that yes, we can potentially see that happening. All right, the third root cause of why there could be mental health imbalance, and really this is the one I'm very connected to because I'm a nutrition scientist. I see that when people are eating unhealthy diets, they tend to have lesser quality mood. They tend to be more anxious. They tend to be more depressed. They tend to be more reactive, irritable, angry, more volatile, less of kind of this even, steady feel throughout the day. So all of these things are important with food. The macronutrients that we take in, the protein, carbohydrate, and fat, because many of those proteins that we take in, they are the substrate or the actual compound that we need to make neurotransmitters. So if we're low on protein, we're not eating through the day, we're not getting the variety of different foods, we may not have proper nutritional status, which can very much impact mood. What we see is that unhealthy diets, as I mentioned, now this is even in the literature, in the Lancet Psychiatry, which is it's a very highly regarded medical journal. There's even talk about this in the psychiatry discipline, how unhealthy diets can lead to a more depressed mood and healthy diets can lead to a better mood. So specifically what we see is that there is greater risk for depression with taking in fast foods, ultra processed foods. This is where you look at foods and you look at the label and it has more in the way of ingredients than actual foods. So having more sugars, more processed carbohydrate, again, going with the foods that people are drawn to when they're stressed actually can make them even more stressed and more depressed. So the goal is to break out of that cycle. Now, for many people, what they look at is, okay, well, what kind of diet do I have to eat? The Mediterranean diet is a very well-studied way of eating. It is native to the Mediterranean region. So over in Europe, the 16 different countries which are eating fresh foods, lesser processed foods. And what we see is that the more that people eat like they're in the Mediterranean, the less incidence there is of depression. And when researchers start to look at, well, what is it about the Mediterranean diet that is responsible for this reduced depression, what they find is that there are certain features of the Mediterranean diet that are important, like fruits and nuts, legumes, and even looking at healthy fats and how important that is. So when we think about nutrition, I would say, rather than think about, oh my goodness, I have to follow the Mediterranean diet, I would say focus on blood sugar. Focus on healthy blood sugar and how important this is, because if your blood sugar is stable, you're eating protein, you're eating fiber, you're eating complex carbohydrates through the day. What you will tend to observe is that you have less food cravings. When people have erratic blood sugar, so they eat something sweet and then they have an increase of their blood sugar, then they come down very low. It's kind of like a roller coaster, right? We don't want a roller coaster. We want rolling hills of blood sugar. So as you can see here, this was a study with type 1 diabetics, and they showed that in these diabetics, that when people had normal blood sugar, they had less of a food craving. 15% of people had a food craving when they had normal blood sugar. But when they had low blood sugar, then they had a greater craving for food. And typically those cravings are more for carbohydrate. So let's talk about some of the tools. What can you bring into your family, your friends, your communities? How can you actually do these things together? Because I think it's more potent and powerful to affect the change of what you're eating through having others support you and then you support them. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that I have used clinically in groups and what has worked. And you're free to use any or all of these tools for yourself, with your groups, anything that you would like. I give these away just as free tools. So this is something that I developed called the Food and Mood Tracker. It's very simple. All you do is for 1 week, you observe the colors of your foods and the colors of your moods. So you can do this very easily throughout the day. And you don't have to write down any of the foods that you're taking in. You would just look at your breakfast and you would say, okay, I'm actually thinking of my breakfast this morning. I did have strawberries and pomegranate, so I'm going to check off the red box. Orange, I didn't have any orange, so I'm going to make sure that I have some orange, some kind of orange plant food for lunch or for dinner. And then you go through each of those colors, right? So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, brown, and white. And then you also assess, and I do this at the end of the day. Focus on the moods maybe at the end of the day, and you can just do a survey and you reflect back and you say, okay, was I angry or frustrated? If you were, do the red circle, just put a check or an X. Was I feeling playful or adventurous? Was I having some aspect of play? Did I give myself some time for that? And you might be missing some of that orange, right? So then you would not check that. Yellow, were you joyful, happy? Green, did you feel a sense of love or gratitude? Blue, purple. Blue, purple, you would check if you were feeling sad, down, or depressed. You were feeling blue. Brown, brown is, I have it as a color of being worried or anxious. I kind of think of it like mud, where you feel like you're stuck in the mud of your mind and you can't get out of that constant rumination. So that would be brown. And then white could be open-minded and hopeful, inspirational, a sense of awe. So it's just a quick survey for yourself. And, many of us run through these emotions very quickly in a day. And the more that we start to focus on how we feel through the day, it's like a muscle. We start to quickly identify with, okay, I'm feeling angry. Let me move through it. Let me acknowledge the anger. Let me see about my food. Am I off track? Am I eating too much in the way of processed foods? So this is just an example of it filled out. And again, you can do this with a group. You can do it on your own. The other thing is to track your emotional patterns. Now you can do that through the Food and Mood Tracker. Just do it through color. Start to talk with children. What is the color of your mood? And kids are so good at this, actually. Kids can help to teach us as adults how we get back into feeling again and acknowledge our feelings, because so much of our society really puts emotions into a bucket of saying it's weak, get over it. Let's just, ignore those emotions and think and move ourselves out it through intellect. And what I would say is that children can help us with being in that flow, right? Acknowledging when we are having an emotion. And the more that we acknowledge and we allow it, the more that it can move through a bit more. So what I have done with people is I have them take a journal and they write a little bit about what they feel. And then they also write a little bit about their eating. How has their eating been? Has it been erratic? Well, have their emotions been erratic? I have found that how you eat is how you live and how you feel. And how you feel translates into how you live and how you eat and what you eat. So identifying with your emotions is actually giving you a lot of good information, a lot of good data about yourself that may be informing your eating at kind of this root cause or a different level. And what I have found is that most people don't even know the language of their emotions anymore. I have to tell you, I was doing a workshop once with women and it was on emotional eating and everybody was in a circle. And I said, okay, ladies, let's just do a quick check-in with our emotions. Let's just go around and say our name and just say how you feel just in this time and space. Just how do you feel? Well, the first woman that checked in, she said, she said her name and then she said, I'm concentrating. And I was thinking to myself that, well, that's not really an emotion, but let's just keep it going. Well, the next woman said, hi, she gave her name and then she said, I'm focused. And I started to realize, and I said, ladies, let's stop. Because what I am seeing is that our emotions are up in our mind, in our head, in our intellect. We're using thinking words and not feeling words. So this is an example of a feeling wheel where you can tease out how people are actually feeling. Because many people, if you ask how they are, many times we just say fine, right? And there's a way to be authentic with our emotions, to be concise and to just acknowledge them and to move from that place. So I like this feeling wheel because it gives us our lexicon of emotions back. Many of us have lost how we feel just even through language. So again, check in with kids. They will tell you exactly how they feel. They'll move from happiness to crying to anger in rapid succession, right? So we see that coming through. So let's talk about the eating strategies of how we can actually take some of the principles that I have observed and weave those in. So I mentioned the food and mood tracker, the emotional journal, looking at foods, how we're doing that. I think that these are wonderful for helping us with things like emotional eating. And as I mentioned, if you just want to kind of get a sense of what your life is like, just look at what your eating is like. And if you want to change your life, you can either change your life in a variety of ways, or you can change your eating, because if you change your eating, chances are you're going to change how you're living. When you start eating slow, you're going to start living slower. You're going to have more pauses. You're going to have more reflection. So one of the fun things that I have done over the years is have people create an eating timeline. So I have well, my story around eating is a bit complex. I grew up in Chicago. And when I grew up in the 1970s, eating healthy really was not a thing, right? In fact, you were kind of an outcast. You were kind of a health nut if you were into eating and fitness and your food in the 1970s. Well, I had a health nut mom, and she was all gung-ho about eating. She was really passionate about food and her faith, actually. She became very in touch with her spirituality. At the same time, she was becoming very much in touch with what we were putting into our bodies. But for me, being a 7, 8, 9-year-old at the time, this was very traumatic to have to change my eating. So I couldn't have things like white bread. She would tell me, Deanna, the whiter the bread, the quicker you're dead. No more white bread. We're going to have brown bread. And for me at school, to bring brown bread sandwiches, like this high fiber homemade bread, instead of the Wonder Bread, the very processed white bread that everybody else was eating at the time, it was pretty traumatic for me. So my eating timeline goes back to when I was a child, not realizing that what my mom was doing was actually a really good thing. And by the way, my mom is still very healthy, living in Chicago, and has stayed on that course of being healthy, and you can see where that has led me as well. I'm talking with you about nutrition, but we all have a story around food. Everybody does. Whether or not we had a health nut mom, we all have a story around food, whether it's food is memories, food is love, food is connection. So reflect on even your timeline. Draw a line on a piece of paper and start to plot out 10 top eating events in your life. Just 10. You have many more, but just do 10 to see where it takes you. And you can start to see if there is a connection with mood and food as you go. Get a sense of your emotions as you are plotting those individual eating events throughout your timeline. It's a fun thing to do. And for most of us, we have so much kind of moving together and dancing together through our everyday, right? Whether it's our eating timeline might involve stress in eating, or fast food and eat in our lifestyle. You know, we're just up against so much in the way of our eating. It takes a lot to try to overturn that. But the more that we can be dedicated to our body, our emotions, and our mind, and even our spirit, the more that we'll start to realize that every choice is significant. The foods that we're choosing to eat are going to change how we feel, which is going to change how we think, which is going to change our overall sense of purpose and how we're moving in the world. And then further, all of those things are going to go back into changing what foods that we choose to eat. So this is why I say that eating colorful foods can help us to live a colorful life. I have, as a nutrition scientist, realized that there's so much diet talk out there, right? And I have moved away from diets because I feel that diets feels like you're going on something, you're going to come off of something. But the tried and true in the literature has truly been fruits and vegetables. And in fact, eating more fruits and vegetables is not just it's not just important for reducing the risk of chronic disease. It's also been associated with less psychological distress, a better mood, even greater happiness, flourishing, and a sense of well-being, which is pretty phenomenal if you think about it. And there are some studies, I'm not going to belabor you with all of the details, but essentially eating more fruits and vegetables in this particular study was associated with more flourishing in life. On the days when more fruits and veggies were eaten, there were greater reports of well-being, curiosity, and creativity. And creativity is another element that I am going to talk about and its importance for a healthy mood. Here's another study, and there are many of them. I'm just giving you a little window into the study showing that eating colorful foods like fruits and vegetables lead to better emotional well-being. This was a study in young adults. They tracked their eating for 21 days in a row. And what they found was that they had a better mood, greater positive affect on the days that they ate more fruits and vegetables. So oftentimes you don't even have to wait. You just experience that sense of emotional well-being immediately. So as you can see here, with greater amounts of fruits and vegetables that we take in on a daily basis, we have greater life satisfaction. Life satisfaction goes up. So it's pretty significant. You know, if you're not in a good mood, think about, well, what have I been eating? Am I eating brown, yellow, and white foods that don't have color? The natural plant color that we find in nature that is filled with so many of these different healthy phytochemicals that are changing the brain, changing the gut. So how significant is it? Well, actually, having more fruits and vegetables is positively associated with all of these things to the level of a mental shift as though we were going from unemployment to employment. So it has a dramatic shift in our mind. So one of the things I talk about all the time, and Rhonda knows this is why she brought me in as well, is because I talk about eating the rainbow of foods. And even though that sounds really simplified, it sounds like, well, that sounds like that's for children. There's actually a lot of science behind it. And I've even published a paper in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism to speak with the scientific community and even those in the medical field about the science, how each color of foods seems to have a signature in our bodies. Red foods looking at immune health and inflammation. Orange foods helping with reproductive health. Yellow foods for the digestive system. Green foods for the heart. And finally, blue-purple foods for the brain. Now, this is a simplified way to think about it. Of course, there's a lot of interconnection and, you know, having red foods may also help with brain health. But in general, there is some good science to suggest that we see patterns of research where there are certain colors designated by the phytonutrients in food that are having these functional signatures. So that's why if we're missing a color, we might be missing a function in the body. The plant foods that we're taking in through fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, herbs, spices, teas, these plants can influence certain mechanisms that are related to our mental health. especially the inflammation that I talked about. It can help our cells to be more insulin sensitive. And again, remember how I talked about insulin and glucose being connected to our mood state. It can even help us to modulate stress, these plants. So I'm just going to shine a light on one of the colors specifically, because we are drilling into brain health. And research has shown, in fact, there was a survey back in 2009 that showed out of all of the colors of food, 88% of people are not eating enough blue purple foods. They're falling short on that every day. You know, I was just at the grocery store yesterday and I took a picture because it was beautiful to see that there was orange cauliflower, white cauliflower, and even purple cauliflower. So I live in the Pacific Northwest. I don't live in the Chicago area where I was born and raised, but I live in the Pacific Northwest, and there's a lot of, sometimes we get these purple varieties of foods, which I'm sure you do as well. But when you see that purple, choose it. Purple is precious. Tell your kids that purple is precious. Whenever they see purple foods at the store, in the produce section, a purple carrot, a purple potato, a purple broccoli. These are nutrient enhanced foods specific for brain health. In fact, what makes those foods blue purple are certain polyphenols, certain compounds, and those compounds seem to have a reduced anxiety effect. So I'm going to share with you just a little bit about blueberries and grapes, because these two foods have been most studied within that blue purple category. And what we tend to see is that blue purple foods help with learning, memory, and even mood. So I would say it's like a twofer, right? We get the cognitive aspects of blue purple foods. So we get that to be helped along with learning and memory. But then we also have the mood aspects. And if we are in a better mood state, we can actually think better. When we can think better, we're more streamlined, we're more focused, we can make better decisions about our lives. So these blue purple foods are filled with certain plant compounds that are changing brain activity. And a lot of this research wasn't done by me. It's been done by researchers at Tufts University, a variety of different places in the world where they actually studied this. So here's some, I just want to share with you some of the pictures that I have taken in my grocery store. Purple carrots. Purple carrots are more nutrient dense than orange carrots. So whenever you see them, I know they look a little bit more thin, but they're actually more flavorful and more nutritious. Here's that purple cauliflower I was talking about. It even kind of looks like a brain, doesn't it? Purple Brussels sprouts, another good one that I have seen at my grocery store. Those don't come up too often, but when they do, I am definitely selecting them. You know, I often get the question about chocolate, because on this spectrum of blue-purple foods, many times I bring in discussion about brown. Brown is not all unhealthy. You know how I was talking about brown foods being connected to grilled, fried, crisp foods that have been overcooked? There are certain foods in nature that are brown, like tea. Like here this morning, I am sipping a cup of tea that is brown. And a lot of the brown foods, like the bran on rice or the bran on wheat, that can be beneficial for our mood. So if we think about the brown foods, one of them I get asked a lot about is cocoa and chocolate. So what about chocolate? Why do we tend to go towards things like chocolate when we are feeling kind of depressed or we need a pick-me-up? Well, chocolate contains a lot of different things. It does contain caffeine, so it can change our energy state. We can feel more energized just by having chocolate. Sometimes, depending on the kind that we're buying, it can contain more sugar. It can contain dairy. So I would say that, you know, chocolate is just not to be dismissed out of hand. I think we need to look at the type of chocolate. What is the quality of chocolate? Having certain amounts of chocolate, because actually, I gotta say, cocoa, cacao, these types of foods are high in foods that would beneficially modulate mood. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll take cacao powder, just in its natural state, no sugar, no nothing. I'll just take that and put it into a teacup, and then I'll put hot water in and I'll just mix it and drink it. So this can be healthy. There can be certain aspects of cocoa, cacao, but when we get into the world of chocolate, sometimes this can become more of an emotional connection rather than a healthy way to get the phytonutrients in brown foods. So if we think of the rainbow, one of the other tools that I want to give you is what I call the Eat the Rainbow Toolkit. And I've presented this over and over again, even to congressional staff. I think it was back in, goodness, 2021, just as a way for people to get healthier, get their immune systems healthier. This will help us in so many respects if we just begin to eat the rainbow. So why would we want to eat the rainbow? The why, the what, the how, the where. So this is in 3 parts. Right? So the second aspect is then to track the rainbow. I think that if you don't measure it, you don't change it. People do need to measure it, even in small ways. And that can be done just by taking pictures on your phone of a food or the meal that you're eating for lunch. And then you would just simply count the colors, right? And there's a little bit of a description here of how you do it. You aim for the rainbow every day, just one food in every color category. That's it. That's it. You don't even have to track the amount. It's simply, did you get a red food? Did you get an orange food? Did you have sweet potato, an orange bell pepper? Did you have a carrot? Did you have a mandarin? Did you have mango? Did you have any of those foods? And you can even put the number of those different colors within. But I really just say keep it simple and just try to get one of each color per day. I've had children do this food tracker. It's been fun to see even 5-year-olds sitting there with their meal and just clicking the boxes or the circles when they eat those foods. So just even aiming for 1 week of trying to eat more color. And then some people need a little bit more in the way of ideas for the different colors of foods. So this is a shopping list that you can bring in to be looking at, oh, I need more yellow foods. What are some ideas? So I give you the ideas here. And I also give you a way to count the foods on your tracker by looking at this. Now, as you can see here, there are a lot of green foods. There are only certain varieties of purple and black. You can see a lot under brown and tan. So be thinking about eating seasonally too. I have noticed that we tend to see more blue-purple foods in the autumn months. And I think in some ways that prepares us for what we see in the winter. So this is the Eat the Rainbow Toolkit. And again, all of you can have access to this. Rhonda can provide it. I just provide it for free on my website. I just say, take it, bring it to schools. I have some practitioners who have trained with me who do this with children. They do it with older adults. It can be done with anybody. As you can see, it's very simple to do. Just 1, 2, 3. The why, the what, the how, the where, tracking those foods, and then the shopping list. The second strategy, this will be a little bit faster. I spend a lot of time on eating the rainbow because it is really one of the seemingly simple things we can do for the greatest impact. I do think that creativity is also very, very important. Creativity enables us to express ourselves. It reduces stress. It cultivates resilience. It gives us a sense of purpose and meaning. So when people, I bring this in because later in life, I began to make art. I began to paint. I was tuned into color, not just through my foods, but on a canvas. And I was finding that the colors were like nutrients for me. So it's not that I had to study art. It was just that I needed to express myself, to release the stress in order to help myself to have a better mood. So for some of us, we have different ways that we like to bring in creativity. It doesn't have to be on a canvas with paint. We can do this in so many different ways. We can even just think of the plate that we have that we're eating from as our canvas. And then how do we prepare food? What does our plate look like? How is food art? We can also think in a creative way. We can go outside and be in nature. We can listen to music for 4 minutes and change our brain chemistry. We can journal. We can get a coloring book. So many great adult coloring books now, like where we can just, just sit there and focus on the color, the design. So everybody, I really want to encourage you to get more creative, because when we are more creative, when we really engage our playful self, we can find our way out of those ruts of life, those stuck patterns. We move out of eating ruts. So as you can see here, there are even studies showing that having more mindfulness, having more meditation can help to reduce binge eating and emotional eating. Having more relaxation, having greater breath work and breathing response can help us to modulate stress and our eating behaviors. And then the last one before we close is, and I've already alluded to this, so this is not new. And as you can see, I load up at the bottom of the slide a bunch of scientific studies, because some of you say, you're probably thinking, well, she's just saying this, but how does she know? A lot of this is built upon the scientific research and my own clinical experience. So I try to bring together both. And one of the biggest things that I see in conjunction with color, creativity, is that people are stuck in these ruts. So when we're stuck in that, we can have the same mindset. So bringing in variety of food, variety of people, variety of experiences, variety, and that's why travel is so enriching sometimes, because we actually get different perspectives, right? This can change our mood state. So very simply, when we have greater variety of fruits and vegetables, we see greater associations with a better mini mental state exam and cognitive domains. So in other words, our thinking becomes better, our memory becomes better, and so does our attention. That was seen in adults. Children with less dietary diversity and less dietary adequacy tend to have greater anxiety. So changing it up for kids is important, as is with women. Women with lower dietary diversity had greater associations with anxiety and depression. So I have also put together a variety tracker, because I like to take the science, put it into practical application. And as you can see here, if you can try to get 50 unique plant foods in 7 days, this is one gauge of variety. So yesterday I was at the grocery store, as I was saying to all of you, and I chose different kinds of apples, because if I was just eating the same kind of apple every day, it doesn't count for variety. But if I have a Golden Delicious, I have a Fuji apple, I have a Pink Lady apple, now I have 3 different varieties of apple, and I can count them on my variety tracker through the week. So again, 50 unique foods in 7 days. So, and then finally, I'm just going to leave you very quickly with some of the nutrients that I believe are important for better mood, especially for depression. And this work comes from Dr. LaChance, Dr. Drew Ramsey. They published an article on antidepressant foods, and they looked at the pathways to better mood and found that these were the top 12 nutrients. And then they took those nutrients and then looked at the different food categories. And they found that vegetables were number 1. Vegetables were the category of foods where you could get the most amount of those nutrients, followed by organ meats. Believe it or not, having those organ meats, even things like shellfish, and then fruits. Those were the top 3. So if we look just at the plant foods, what we see is a lot of green here: watercress, spinach, turnip greens, mustard greens, beet greens. Perfect time of the year for all of that, right? For animal foods, they identified oysters, liver, poultry giblets. These may not be appetizing for some of you, right? So variety is key. So I'm going to close by saying that there are so many different messages here, and I bet that each of you had a different takeaway. Number 1, think about the root cause. Work with a practitioner to help to uncover where is inflammation in your body. Get your gut on track. Have an identification of which nutrients you need. And then aim for more color, creativity, and diversity so that you have just an overall more colorful life, more creative life, more diverse life. I've given you a number of tracking and assessments because again, I do think that if you're not tracking it, you may not change it as well. And then also to be thinking about those nutrients that I mentioned at the end so that you can have greater nutrient density to give your body the nutrients it needs for a better mood. So if you can just reflect on how food and mood are so interrelated in our physical body, our emotional state, our mental focus, and even our spiritual sense of purpose and meaning, they're all connected. So when we change one, we change all. So I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody. Thank you for the invite, Rhonda. And I just want to open it up for any questions if we have time. So I'll stop sharing right there.
Okay, yeah, we have a little time for questions. You can either put it in the chat or raise your hand and you can unmute if we see you. Go ahead. I'm sure there's questions. You answered one of my questions. I was saving one because right before you came on, after the movement session, I was thinking, about the research that underscores how beneficial movement is in changing your mood. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm gonna give a tip. I'm gonna say the best way to change your mood in the moment is to move. But I was gonna ask you though, are there foods, mindfulness can change your mood and make you feel better. I know if I get up and move instantly in the moment, but usually I think of nutrition as something that takes a little time to make the transition in the mood. But I think you mentioned how it can happen. There's foods you can eat that can change your mood immediately.
Immediately, absolutely. Like just even right after a meal, you can have a change in your mood state. So be aware of that. Like, how do you feel after you eat certain foods? Your body's giving you a lot of information. And you're right, Rhonda, you can change so many things through so many things. So you can do it through physical movement. You can do it through nutrition. Just even one meal, one snack can change mood state, one connection with a person, one conversation. So that's why nothing is insignificant. Nutrition is adding to the big picture because it's something that we have to engage in every day. We need to eat. So
Right.
I even wore blue purple today, by the way, to remind everybody about the blue purple connection with our brain and trying to get that every day.
Excellent. I love it. The commercial of the person that's the Aretha Franklin is really mean and they give her a Snickers. What would you suggest as a snack to give people when they're in a bad mood?
Nuts
Nuts.
and seeds, like cashews, mixed nuts. Like whenever I travel, I bring nuts with me. They're accessible. They help with our mood. They have healthy fats, healthy protein, different nutrients that will help our brain chemistry. The other thing could be an avocado. Avocados are like the perfect food, right? I call it an avocado taco where I just open it up, squeeze it out. Satisfying. It quells us, it kind of like gives us that grounded feeling again.
Excellent. And then fats are very much connected to the production of hormones. So it's great. So there was a question about hot flashes. So I'm thinking of fats and hormones, or is there?
You want to talk about hot flashes for a second? Hot flashes, what I would say there, ladies, is to really be attentive to your stress level. So hot flashes are what are referred to as a sympathetic response. So our temperature gauge is changing as we get older and we have changes in hormones. So some of the things that can fuel that hot flash response is inflammation in the body. So work with a practitioner to get that inflammation under control so that you can clear some of the heat. So anything that we talked about as it relates to inflammation, change how you're cooking food, don't overcook food, don't overdo caffeine, don't overdo sugar. All of those things will be relevant for helping you with hot flashes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Minich. I hope most of these people in here are starting worksite wellness programs and they're looking for ideas, or they're starting on their own wellness journey. So the information you've shared, they can go back to work and create a culture that supports wellness that includes good nutrition. You've taught us a lot and I appreciate it. We appreciate the resources. I'm getting so many comments in the chat how great this presentation was, and I concur. My heart is full. So thank you so much. And we'll have to bring you back again. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Keep in touch, everybody. Bye-bye.